I got a haircut. Tonight, I am going to go to the cinema and watch one of my favourite and most influential films on me as not just a filmmaker, not just musically, but also as a person. So tonight, I get to go and see the 1991 film Point Break. In music history, there are certain years that stand out for amazing releases. For example, 1967 with the kind of whole rock thing, and in 1977 with the whole punk thing. And then, when I was 15 years old, I'd been playing in a band, my own band, for about a year. 1991 happened. Now, for a 15-year-old that was in a band and kind of seemingly looking for a way and a tribe and everything else, this was some year musically. Now, I will put a link below to the Wikipedia page that shows you all of the albums that were released in 1991. For people of our age, it seems pretty crazy to think about the albums that were released there. For example, to think that in a 1 year span, R.E.M's Out of Time was released, Crowded House's Woodface, Achtung Baby by U2, alongside A Tribe Called Quest's Low End Theory, Metallica's Black Album, Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, Blue Lines by Massive Attack, and also albums by your proper hair metal bands like Motley Crue, Poison, Warrant, etc, etc. All of that side by side, which in itself is pretty crazy when you look at the albums that were released then. And then you get onto the whole grunge or alternative scene. So for a music-obsessed 15-year-old to have the likes of Blood Sugar Sex Magik by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Spin Doctor's Pocket Full of Kryptonite, 10 by Pearl Jam, obviously Nirvana's Nevermind, Gish by Smashing Pumpkins, Bad Motorfinger by Soundgarden, Man in a Box by Alice in Chains, the single was released, all this insane kind of alternative grunge music that we kind of had a little hint of in 1990. There were a few albums that came out. Faith No More released an amazing album, obviously Facelift by Alice in Chains came out. It was kind of, there was these little hints, but in 1991 it just completely and utterly musically floored me. But in terms of movies, up until that point, I guess my influences had been fairly standard, I guess. 80s movies, so the likes of Back to the Future, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Ghostbusters. Still three of my favourite films. And then in 1991, Point Break came out, and I just loved it. I just loved the whole kind of tribal thing. I loved the whole fact that there was this kind of dichotomy for Keanu Reeves' character, Johnny Utah. This whole idea of him being an FBI agent, but kind of, you know, in the institution and all the rest of it, and being pulled by this alternative kind of lifestyle and way of approaching life that Bodhi and his kind of cronies, the ex-presidents, kind of had. And I loved that. I still feel that slight dichotomy of being a more kind of institution kind of based establishment thing. And also this idea of just, you know, living this alternative lifestyle. And Patrick Swayze was super cool, and so were all of his cronies. But I also liked, obviously, Anthony Kiedis from Red Hot Chili Peppers is in that as well. But the whole tattoos, I believe Warchild was the character's name in the beach fight scene. That tattoo the guy had on his back was just, it just blew me away. The whole thing, the insane dialogue, Kathryn Bigelow's just fantastic direction, I have to say. Just changed. I'd never really seen a film like it. I'd never really seen characters like them. And it just opened my mind up. And the music kind of felt like a wave that followed that on. Movie-wise, since then, obviously, you know, 1991, it was still a fairly traditional film studio thing. But after that, you started having all these alternative kind of films like Clerks, for example, the Kevin Smith film that became a huge success, which I absolutely loved. And the likes of Tarantino, obviously, with Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, etc., etc. There was also a super weird and wacky film called SFW, which, interestingly enough, featured Gary Busey's son, Gary Busey, who was in Point Break. His son was in this film called SFW, and again, an amazing soundtrack. And then there was Singles, the Cameron Crowe film, which had an incredible soundtrack, but quite honestly, I don't think the film was that good. Hot take, maybe. It was almost like the grunge scene of film followed on from the grunge scene of music. And I have to say, it's very much definitely still my major kind of influence. It's where my head sits, not just musically and not just in terms of film, but also in an approach to life. I guess a bit like a hippie movement or a bit like the punk kind of movement. I don't think there is a kind of grunge or an alternative rock mindset, but whatever there is, I definitely seem to have that. And when you look at the soundtrack of Point Break, it kind of sits in this weird world of not really knowing what it is. It's got old school kind of Hendrix is on there. Public Image Limited is kind of like slightly alt kind of punk thing going on, but it it kind of firmly sits in the sort of hair rock metal era. I often wonder actually what the music would have sounded like, what the licensed music original soundtrack would have been like if it had been maybe made in 1991 and then the pre-production had been done in 1992. I genuinely think it would have had much more rock stuff on there. I could have imagined it being a little bit more like the single soundtrack, maybe a bit of Pearl Jam, maybe a bit of Mudhoney, that kind of thing. But that's where my head's at today. I kind of know for a fact, having a 14-year-old and having a 16-year-old, how influential those things are on you for the rest of your life. I think it's fairly well documented that the things that you like between the ages of 15 and 17 become the things that you always like. So even at our age, the things that you look back on that you liked at the age of 15, you're still into. Maybe not so much the things before and not so much the things after. They're passing phases. That has such a lasting and kind of profound influence on us at that age. And I'm sort of acutely aware of that, having two kids that are at that age at the minute, trying to introduce them to things maybe outside their kind of comfort zone, and musically, or in terms of taking them to boxing or whatever it might be, just showing them the world. You know, ultimately, I sort of found those things on my own. You know, I found the films and I found the music through a variety of people. The people I was in a band with, a guy called Andy Marshall I went to school with, used to give me these mixtapes. They're still in the loft, of just mad stuff. Mr. Bungle, and it's the first time I'd heard Alice in Chains was on one of his mixtapes. So yeah, going to the cinema tonight has just kind of made me think about those influences and how profound they are. And I guess I'm pretty proud of staying fairly true to them now all these years later. It's still definitely my mindset in terms of the music that I make, the stuff that I write, not that anyone's really ever heard it. It definitely has the grounding in that sort of songwriter thing, but with that aggression or that kind of interesting tone to it. And it feels very cathartic even now after all these decades, as it did listening to it all the way back then. It really helped me. And it's the same with the movie stuff. I absolutely adore that slightly more alternative approach to making films and storytelling rather than the more generic thing. But that's where my head's at on day 12, I think it is, and I get to go and see Point Break in the cinema tonight. So I will let you know a little bit about how I felt about that, and whether I was able to abstain from quoting every single quote. Speaking of the quotes, little side story, I did a Dep gig with a band called Cars on Fire that I became a member of, and one of the reasons why I ended up joining that band was the fact that we'd been awake for best part of 2 days, flying back from Dublin where we'd done the gig, and I'd just been stepping in for that show, and we were so tired and so whacked out on kind of just sleep deprivation and probably drunk, that all the way through the flight, me and the lead singer Ali pretty much just quoted Point Break to each other the entire way home. And I think that was a bit more influential on whether I joined the band after that than my ability to play the drums. Anyway, goodbye. Vaya con Dios.